Hey guys, tonight we journey back to a time when cheese could get you excommunicated, exiled, or even executed, depending on who you asked and how moldy it looked. You're trudging through a muddy road in a damp 13th century village somewhere in the heart of Europe. The air is thick with the smell of peat smoke and something else, something sour, pungent, and suspiciously familiar. It's cheese, and not the kind you'd sprinkle on pasta. This stuff is alive. It hums in the corner of market stalls, wrapped in cloth like contraband, traded in hushed tones. You stop at the edge of a crumbling stone wall where an old woman is muttering to herself, eyeing a round, grayish wheel as though it might sprout legs and scurry off. She's not the only one treating dairy with dread. In this world, cheese isn't just a snack, it's an omen. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The church bell tolls in the distance, but no one seems to be heading that way. Instead, you follow the villagers toward a small wooden structure that smells like hay, wax, and fear. It's the local meeting hall, and someone's nailed a parchment to the door. Scrawled in uneven ink are the words, "Cheesemaker to stand trial." Inside, a crowd murmurs. You take your place among them as a gaunt man in a tattered tunic is led to the front. His crime: producing a batch of blue-veined cheese that caused old Marjorie to speak in tongues and claim she'd seen St. Peter waltzing in her soup. Was it divine revelation? Or the early stages of food poisoning? Hard to say, really. Historians still argue whether such visions were treated as spiritual or suspicious. In medieval thought, food didn't just nourish the body, it touched the soul, and certain foods, especially those that fermented, molded or transformed over time, were viewed with theological suspicion. Cheese was a shapeshifter. Milk, a pure and humble substance, somehow turned into something smelly, holy, and powerful. For many, that transformation wasn't just biochemical, it was mystical. You glance at a wooden shelf behind the accused. On it sits a wheel of the infamous cheese. A black cat weaves beneath it, clearly unfazed by the tension. But the villagers aren't so calm. One woman makes the sign of the cross. Another mutters something about demons liking dairy. You remember that in the High Middle Ages, superstition thrived in the corners of every home. If your crops failed, if your cow stopped giving milk, or if your child developed a fever, there had to be a reason. And cheese, especially if it smelled wrong or curdled too fast, made a convenient scapegoat. There's a popular belief floating around this part of the continent that a cursed cheesemaker once crafted a wheel so potent it could kill a man in his sleep. Was it just an overripe camembert? Maybe, or maybe not. According to folklore, certain cheeses were bewitched, particularly if made during an eclipse, or if the cow had been milked by someone with a wandering eye. You shift your weight as the trial continues. No one's entirely sure whether the accused will be fined, flogged, or simply asked to never ferment again. But the cheese, that's getting burned. Right there in the village square, firewood is already stacked. A man in a long robe mutters prayers as he strikes a flint. The smell that follows is unforgettable. Imagine gym socks, old onions, and wet parchment. Then set it all ablaze. And here's the kicker. This isn't even the weirdest part of your day. After the cheese has been reduced to ash and the crowd disperses, you wander down to the edge of the village, where a stream bubbles quietly. An old man is crouched there, soaking something in the water. You get closer. It's a cloth pouch filled with herbs and a sliver of hard cheese. He looks up and grins, revealing 3 teeth and a lifetime of secrets. "Sick cow," he explains, pointing to the bundle. "This'll draw out the poison." Turns out cheese isn't only evil, It's medicine too. In many folk traditions, the same thing that was feared could also be harnessed. A bit of cheese under the tongue was thought to cure toothaches. A slice tied to a wound might draw out infection. It's all context. A wheel of dairy could either ruin your family or rescue your pig. This duality fascinated medieval minds. They lived in a world where objects, animals, and even people could contain both blessings and curses. Cheese embodied that tension better than most things. Soft, but strong. Nourishing, but dangerous. A miracle of preservation, yet always one day away from becoming unholy sludge. As the sun begins to set and the villagers light their lanterns, you find yourself thinking about how something as simple as cheese could provoke such intensity. Maybe it's the uncertainty, the not knowing. Cheese didn't come with an expiration date back then. You judged it by the smell, the look, the sound it made when you tapped it. Yes, really. And if it squeaked back, best to throw it in the fire and say a prayer. You return to your straw bed in the loft of a barn, the scent of scorched cheddar still clinging to your cloak. Somewhere below, a goat bleats mournfully. Perhaps it knew the cheesemaker. Or perhaps, just perhaps, it was plotting to take over the business. Sleep finds you as a soft drizzle taps on the thatch roof, and dreams of whispering wheels of brie and spectral monks chanting about lactose glide through your head. The cheese may be evil, but you've made peace with it. For now, the morning comes with mist and the muffled clang of distant bells, but you're already up, lacing your worn shoes and heading toward the village green. Word has spread overnight. A witch trial is to be held today, and cheese, once again, is at the center of it. You make your way down the dewy path, your breath forming little clouds in the chilly air. As you approach the square, you see the setup. A small wooden platform, a crowd gathering in hushed curiosity, and standing at the center, a woman with wild, silver-streaked hair and a basket full of strange objects. Among them, herbs, carved runes, and yes, 2 hefty lumps of pale yellow cheese, tied together with a red string. You find a spot to sit near the back, next to a man who offers you a chunk of bread and a dubious grin. She talks to the cheese, he whispers, asks it questions, then listens. It would be funny if it weren't also deadly serious. Accusations of witchcraft were no laughing matter, and using cheese for divination, oddly enough, was considered both a real practice and damning evidence. Known in some corners as tyromancy, it involved interpreting the shapes, bubbles, or mold spots in curdled milk or cheese to predict the future. The crowd quiets as a village elder steps forward. "Bring out the wheel," he calls, and just like that, the ritual begins. The accused witch, whose name might be Margaret, or might be Magda, it's hard to tell over the mumbling, sets her basket down and unwraps a new wheel of cheese. It's soft, glistening, with blue veins that seem to shimmer in the light. She slices it in half with a bone-handled knife and holds the pieces aloft, muttering something in a language you don't recognize. Some say she's asking the cheese whether the crops will fail this year. Others say she's asking whether the Baron's daughter will survive childbirth. A few suggest she's just hungry, but then she gasps. A large bubble has burst along the rind in a pattern that, to her at least, resembles a raven. The crowd shudders. Ravens are omens, birds of ill news. This wheel, apparently, has spoken. The villagers lean in. You do too. Not out of belief necessarily, but because the drama is strangely compelling. Historians still argue whether tyromancy was ever truly practiced with sincerity or whether it functioned more like social theater, a performance that legitimized certain decisions or fueled already swirling suspicions. What's clear is that this wasn't a one-off event. From Renaissance Italy to rural Saxony, there are records of cheese being used to determine guilt, fate, and even marriage prospects. If your cheese splits clean, your love will be seen. Something like that. Back at the platform, things are getting tense. A priest has arrived, holding a small crucifix and looking profoundly uncomfortable. He clears his throat. "This is not God's way," he says, though his voice shakes a bit when he says it. The witch, Magda or Margaret, just smiles. She places a piece of the cheese on her tongue and closes her eyes. A collective gasp ripples through the audience. She's consuming the prophecy. You half expect lightning, or, at the very least, for someone to faint dramatically. But all that follows is silence. She opens her eyes and says, quite clearly, "The rain will come on Tuesday." Someone in the crowd drops a chicken. Someone else begins to cry. You, however, aren't sure what's more astonishing, the performance itself, or the fact that people believe it. But then again, belief is often more about fear than fact. And in a world where storms destroy homes and childbirth is a coin flip, maybe you'd believe in cheese too. Eventually, the trial fizzles. The priest, perhaps sensing that conviction might cause more unrest than peace, declares that the matter shall be left to God. The crowd disperses with nervous chatter. No one buys cheese at the market that day. You wander toward the woods, seeking a moment of peace. But even here, superstition lingers. You pass a tree with cheese rinds nailed to its bark, protection against evil spirits, or so the locals claim. You pass a young girl whispering apologies to a lump of butter that's fallen in the dirt. Dairy, it seems, demands respect. It's worth noting that while the Catholic Church did not officially condemn cheese, various monastic orders developed rules around its consumption. Some restricted it during fasting. Others saw it as too indulgent, too tempting. There were even debates over whether cheese counted as meat or milk, depending on how it was made. In other words, cheese wasn't just food. It was theology on a plate. You pause by a stream and dip your fingers in the cold water. Across the way, a small group of children are playing. They're stacking wheels of old bread and pretending they're cheeses. One of them mimes a magical explosion. Another pretends to faint. You smile. Even in play, the legend lingers. A local shepherd trudges by, dragging a sack of something that smells worse than the burned cheese from yesterday. "Mind the goats," he mutters. "They know the bad wheels before we do." You're not entirely sure if he's joking. As dusk falls, you return to the village square. Magda, or Margaret, is gone. The platform is being dismantled. A boy sweeps away bits of rind and straw. Life, it seems, goes on. But as you pass the baker's window, you notice something curious. A wheel of fresh cheese on the sill, glistening and unguarded. You lean closer, just to look. It winks at you. Probably a trick of the light. Probably. The next morning, your path takes you away from the gossiping market stalls and toward the edge of the village, where a stone path winds up a gentle hill. At its summit stands a modest monastery, its slate roof mottled with moss, its outer walls echoing the austerity of its residents. You're here to find out what the monks make of all this cheese commotion. Surely, if anyone can offer a more measured perspective, it's men who rise with the sun and pray 6 times a day. The monastery gate creaks open at your knock, revealing a monk in a patched brown robe, his head freshly tonsured, and his nose red from the cold. He eyes your shoes, your face, and then silently gestures you inside. You're led through a cloister of stone arches into a courtyard where lavender bushes, even in winter, cling stubbornly to life. Birds nest in the eaves. Somewhere, a bell tolls, and you feel a bit like a student called to confession. Soon, you're seated in a plain wooden room with a fire crackling softly in the hearth. A tray is brought, bread, honey, and 3 small wedges of cheese, each labeled in Latin. You eye them warily. One smells pleasant. One smells like wet socks. The third is unclassifiable. Your host, Brother Alaric, folds his hands over his belly and smiles. People always want to talk about sin, he says, but few wish to discuss cheese. You nod politely and take the safest looking piece. He explains that monks across Europe have long produced cheese. In fact, Some of the most beloved varieties in modern kitchens trace their roots to cloistered hands. Brie de Meaux, likely refined in a monastery. Roquefort, a blessed accident in a cave not far from a Benedictine retreat. Even Swiss Emmental owes a debt to devout dairy work. Cheese, it turns out, funded a surprising amount of God's work. Yet, Brother Alaric adds, we have our doubts. He picks up the third wedge, the scary one. Some say this one was crafted in silence for a full lunar cycle. Some say it sings when left alone. I say, we only serve it at Lent. You begin chewing a little slower. In medieval theology, food wasn't just about sustenance. It reflected the moral state of the eater. Meat was violent and carnal. Bread was humble and Christ-like. Wine was a sacrament. But cheese? Cheese hovered in a strange liminal space. It was neither alive nor fully dead, neither cooked nor raw. It fermented, it aged, it behaved according to invisible rules. Monks, with their obsession for order, found this both fascinating and unsettling. You accompany Brother Alaric down a flight of narrow stairs into the monastery's cheese cellar. The air grows cooler and more pungent with every step. Wooden shelves line the walls, stacked with wheels of all shapes, hues, and textures. Some are wrapped in cloth. Others ooze faintly. All are watched with monk-like intensity. This one, he says, gesturing to a squat, crumbly wheel, once cured a brother of migraines, or possibly gave them to him. The record's unclear. Historians still argue whether monastic cheesemaking was more about economy or alchemy. Some orders kept strict records and scientific notes. Others believed their cheeses were guided by divine intervention, or the devil's thumbprint, depending on the outcome. You pause before a particularly sinister-looking specimen, coated in ash. We don't talk about that one, Brother Alaric says with a smile. He doesn't elaborate. Back in the main hall, the monks gather for their noon meal. You're invited to sit at the edge of a long wooden table. The meal is simple: lentil stew, coarse bread, and a final offering, cheese again. This time, it's served with reverence. A short Latin prayer is uttered before knives are passed around. You notice something curious. Despite their theological suspicion, the monks treat cheese with care. It's wrapped neatly, stored carefully, served with ritual. It occupies a space between fear and love, like fire, or poetry, or confession. After the meal, you wander the monastery grounds. The chapel glows with candlelight. Bees hum near the hives. A small goat named Hildegard follows you around like a tail. You start to feel oddly at peace here, until one of the younger monks warns you not to sleep too close to the dairy shed. The wheels shift at night, he says, wide-eyed. Sometimes they roll. Whether he's joking or simply monastically sleep-deprived, you can't tell. As you prepare to leave, Brother Alaric hands you a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. For your journey, he says. Not all cheese is wicked, but it's good to be cautious. You thank him and make your way back down the hill, feeling the slight weight of the cheese in your satchel. It's warm from your body heat now, almost alive. You try not to imagine it whispering. Back in the village, the market is bustling again. A traveling merchant is selling wheels with names like Blessed Brie and Devil's Cheddar. One woman clutches a wedge and murmurs, "For my arthritis." Another swears by goat cheese to keep nightmares at bay. You realize the monks and the villagers aren't so different. They both live in a world that doesn't quite trust cheese, but needs it all the same. You settle into your hay-stuffed mattress, unwrap Brother Alaric's gift, and take a cautious bite. It's nutty, firm, and slightly tangy. You chew thoughtfully. Outside, the stars are bright. Hildegard the goat bleats somewhere in the dark. The cheese doesn't roll. Yet, you awake to the sound of a town crier bellowing from somewhere near the well. "Justice for the dairy," he shouts over and over, like it's a brand new idea. Bleary-eyed and mildly bloated from last night's cheese, you stretch and wander down to the square, curious, wary, and, let's be honest, a little concerned about your digestive future. Turns out today is market day, but with a twist. The town is holding a public tribunal. Not for a person this time, for cheese itself. You weave through a crowd of shawled women, grim-faced bakers, and squabbling hens to find a makeshift platform in the center of the square. On it stands the town magistrate, resplendent in a wool cloak and an expression of grave purpose. Beside him, a wooden pedestal bearing the accused, a wheel of sharp, crusty cheese, visibly sweating in the sun. You find a spot near the front. The magistrate clears his throat. This wheel of St. Alaric's gold, he announces, was found at the center of 3 distinct incidents. He flips open a parchment scroll and begins to list the offenses. A merchant's cart that collapsed after transporting it, a newborn baby who cried continuously within 5 yards of it, and a cat, just one cat, that refused to walk past it. The logic is, frankly, not airtight. Still, you're captivated. This isn't the first time a foodstuff has faced trial. In parts of medieval France and Switzerland, animals were tried in court, often with lawyers appointed to represent them. There are recorded cases of pigs being convicted for manslaughter, or grasshoppers being excommunicated for ruining crops. Historians still argue whether these events were deeply symbolic or just medieval folks being deeply bored. Now cheese, it seems, is having its moment. A baker is called forward to testify. "I sliced it," he says solemnly, "and the knife bent." A collective gasp ripples through the square. Then my dough wouldn't rise for a week. Next comes a woman who claims her dreams became unnaturally vivid after serving the cheese with boiled onions. "I saw a fish," she whispers, speaking Latin, wearing a crown. There is, admittedly, no cross-examination. You glance down at your satchel, where Brother Alaric's gift rests quietly. You resist the urge to pat it like a sleeping puppy. Not the time. A legal scribe, probably a cobbler during weekdays, reads a list of proposed punishments. These include burying the cheese outside the village limits, feeding it to a condemned rooster, or, and this one gets enthusiastic nods, launching it into the river while chanting Psalm 23. Eventually, the magistrate chooses the moderate option. The cheese shall be locked in the church crypt for 7 days. If no further calamity occurs, it may be eaten, by volunteers only. A bell rings. The cheese is carried off by 2 altar boys wearing gloves. One of them sneezes. A woman screams. You stay behind as the crowd disperses. The platform creaks in the wind. A nearby boy is tying wheels of cheese to a toy cart, reenacting the trial with great flair. "You're guilty?" he yells, tossing a hunk into a puddle. You wander over to the village records office, a dusty room that smells like wax and forgotten deadlines. Inside, a scribe shows you a worn ledger filled with strange entries. "Cows refusing to face east," one reads. "Milk turned red after full moon," says another. And then, most intriguing, cheese whistled. According to the scribe, several local laws once governed dairy production. For instance, milk drawn before sunrise was considered risky. Cheesemakers had to observe silence during the curdling stage on certain feast days. And no one, absolutely no one, was to store cheese near the town's baptismal font. That rule, apparently, had theological implications no one dared to revisit. These strange laws weren't limited to this village. In parts of early modern England, cheese had to be spoken over by a priest before being sold in spring markets. In some Slavic cultures, it was hidden in the walls to protect homes from lightning. And in the Italian Alps, women weren't allowed to approach the cheese cellar during menstruation, lest their unbalanced humors ruin the aging process. Quirky? Certainly. But underneath the oddity lies something very human. Fear of what can't be fully explained. Cheese ferments in silence. It bubbles. It shifts. It transforms from liquid to solid in ways medieval minds couldn't understand. Without microbiology, that transformation felt like magic or mischief. You walk slowly back through the market. A vendor offers you a sample of something new. Heresy Gruyere, he calls it with a wink, guaranteed to confuse your neighbors. You decline, politely. Back in your lodgings, you unroll the cloth around Brother Alaric's cheese. It's held its shape, but the scent is stronger now. Nutty, woody, maybe even floral. You nibble a corner. It's delicious, comforting even. As twilight settles over the village, you hear laughter, children playing cheese court again. Someone's wrapped a wheel in a tiny cloak and made a powdered wig out of bread crusts. You chuckle, then pause. Did that cheese just wink? Number definitely not. Probably. The weather turns damp again overnight. You awaken to the low, groaning cough of thunder far off in the hills, and the scent of wet cobblestones rising through your window. In the village below, people move differently today. Not with panic, nothing quite so dramatic, but with the slow, sideways caution of those who know bad luck is brewing. And wouldn't you know it? Everyone's blaming the cheese. You wrap your cloak tighter and step outside. There's a huddle of townsfolk near the baker's shop, whispering about the weather, the sudden appearance of boils on Farmer Anselm's goat, and, inevitably, the cursed wheel locked away in the church crypt. "It's the rain," says one. "It started when we locked it up." Another mutters, "And now the air smells buttery." You follow the scent of dread through the market, past abandoned carts and shuttered windows, until you reach the little church at the end of the lane. It's modest, with crumbling frescoes and a crooked bell tower. Inside, it smells of incense and old wood. The crypt door has been chained shut, but a priest stands guard beside it, looking more resigned than alarmed. The cheese is softening, he tells you with a faraway look. It weeps. You blink. He shrugs. The logic here is deliciously foggy. Because the weather is bad and the cheese exists, clearly one is causing the other. Never mind that it's autumn, or that storm clouds have very little to do with dairy. In this sleepy corner of the world, explanations don't have to make sense. They just have to stick. And stick they do. Soon, villagers begin to arrive with offerings. A dried sprig of sage, a coin, a bowl of soup, all placed solemnly by the door of the crypt. It's not exactly a shrine, but it's not a shrine either. You watch as a child drops a small wooden cow at the base of the door and whispers, "Please don't eat, Papa." Even in fear, there's affection. Cheese is part of their lives, both daily ritual and cosmic wildcard. As the rain picks up, you're invited into the apothecary's hut for shelter. Inside, the shelves are lined with cloudy bottles, shriveled roots, and an unsettling number of frog-related items. The apothecary, a short woman with extraordinary eyebrows, offers you a thick wedge of yellowish cheese wrapped in oilskin. "Pecorino for plagues," she says, "or possibly parasites. I forget which." You accept it anyway. It smells vaguely like survival. She tells you about the time during the Black Death when people believed cheese could both cause and cure the pestilence. In fact, during the 14th century, certain towns banned soft cheese entirely during outbreaks, worried that its untrustworthy texture might harbor foul spirits. Others encouraged cheese consumption, believing the strong flavors might ward off illness or distract from the odor of death. Historians still argue whether these practices helped or harmed. Cheese, after all, doesn't carry plague. Rats do. But who wants to blame rats when cheese sits there looking so smug? Outside, the storm surges. The stream swells. People start lighting candles in their windows. And then the news spreads. Someone broke into the crypt. You're swept along with the crowd to the church, where the chains dangle loose and the door creaks open. Inside the crypt, the wheel is gone. In its place, a puddle, a tuft of mold, and a bite-sized wedge wrapped in parchment. On the note, it asked nicely. No one knows what to make of it. Was the cheese stolen? Did it escape? Did it, impossibly, evaporate into myth? No one asks the priest. He's too busy mumbling prayers and flinging salt. That evening, the village gathers in the inn. Over mulled cider and plates of nervously sampled cheese, the mood begins to thaw. People start sharing stories. The merchant who swore off dairy admits he misses his Gouda. The baker claims he once saw a wheel float. The goat herder confesses that his goats have been dreaming, loudly, and in French. Someone plays a lute. Someone else passes a soft round of monk's cheese and insists, just one bite won't summon demons. Probably. You retreat to your room, your satchel a little heavier with strange cheese wedges and stranger memories. Through the window the storm has passed. The village sleeps under a misty moon. Somewhere nearby, a cat yowls. You wonder if it's mourning the crypt cheese, or asking for a slice. You lie back on the straw-stuffed mattress, the scent of pecorino still lingering on your fingers. And as you drift off, you think of everything you've seen. Monks guarding secret wheels, villagers casting judgment on dairy, witches reading futures in curds, and one possibly sentient cheese that wept in a crypt. Sleep takes you gently, like a blanket laid by a careful hand. You dream of cheese wheels rolling across the hills at dawn, soft voices calling your name in perfect harmony, and the faintest sound of Brie breathing beside you. And now, with the village quiet and your journey drawn to a close, let your thoughts grow slower, softer, like a wheel of cheese tucked into straw, aging in peace, far from judgment or fire. The flicker of lanterns fades. The last murmurs of song dissolve into the cool hush of night. All around you, the world settles. The streets empty, the doors close gently, and even the wind seems to tiptoe past the shutters. In this moment, there is no fear of cursed curds or crypt-dwelling cheddar, only calm. You breathe in and out. Imagine the old monastery again, perched on its quiet hill, where monks still turn wheels with care and listen to the low hum of ripening silence. Imagine the apothecary's hut, with its jars of strange remedies and its windows fogged with steam. And imagine the cheese, not wicked or blessed, but simply itself, waiting to be sliced, savored, and maybe misunderstood once more. Your body sinks into the bed. Your limbs are heavy, your thoughts adrift, like bread floating in a bowl of warm broth. There's nothing you need to fix, or judge, or chase. Just rest. Just warmth. Let the strangeness of the day melt away like fondue over fire. Let the odd rituals and whispering villagers become background chatter, fading into a distant hum. You are safe. You are warm. And you've made it through a day when cheese stood trial and lived to tell the tale. Sleep, now, as quietly as a cellar in winter, as gently as curds forming in still milk, and as slowly, softly, dreamily, as history itself.